There's been a lot of progress on the Kubota project since the last official update. We have the engine partially broken in now. It's running much better. I still have the hood and cowl assembly off. I wanted to leave that off until I made sure my engine was going to be good to go. We had a lot of trouble getting this engine started initially due to low compression for a number of reasons, actually. The biggest we found was that the cylinder head was cracked. We missed it the first time around. We replaced it with a brand new cylinder head that came with the valves pre-installed and still had trouble. It turned out the valves were poorly ground on the new head. It was a aftermarket replacement head, Kumar Brothers, and looked good initially on first inspection, but once I started taking the valves apart, it was a very poor valve job. So I lapped them myself, got those sealed up a better. I was finally able to get the tractor to start. It would start and run, but it was hard to start and had very low power. And I believe the remaining issue is the valves weren't fully seated, or piston rings rather, were not fully seated, which trying to work it really hard, trying not to let it idle too much. The first few hours of operation on a diesel engine is critical for proper piston ring seating. So you really want to get it hot, let it run and work hard. Idling it too much initially, babying it too much initially can cause those rings to never really seat properly. So we got the wiring together enough to be able to run it. This is a combination of new wiring for the starter and glow plug system with some of my old wiring. Replaced my battery leads. I have a quick release on the negative terminal so that I can easily just disconnect the battery for storage, not have to worry about any drains or anything pulling load off of the system. And I did add a gauge set. We added a water temp, volts, and oil pressure. So we got it out of the garage. We were able to work it a little bit with this subsoil over here. Pulled the subsoiler around a little bit on the property, dug some trenches with that. It didn't really seem like I was loading it that hard. It seemed to actually pull the subsoiler pretty well. The worst load it had right off the bat was just trying to go up this hill. This hill on the side of the property. I initially tried to go up the hill in medium, and the engine actually started to stall out just from the work of trying to climb the hill in medium gear. So I had to switch to low. Had a couple problems actually trying to shift from medium to low. So I think there's some adjustment to do with the linkage. We need to maybe work with that linkage a little bit. It didn't want to go in the medium for me. While it was stuck in neutral, I ran into the problem of the brakes not wanting to work at first, just due to me not having worked them in a long time. Once I started working them a little bit, the brakes started working a little better. I should have tested that before I started going up the hill, because once I was in the neutral, on a hill, with brakes that were barely working, it was kind of a bad situation. So I started to turn the steering wheel. I was able to get the steering wheel turned enough to keep me from rolling back down the hill too much. And in the process of doing that, I discovered that if you pull up on the steering wheel, the column is coming out inside the shaft there. It's not actually coming off the steering wheel to the shaft is fine. The shaft is actually coming loose inside the steering box. So I need to get that figured out. Once it pops off, you can see the steering wheel is no longer connected to anything. And it's a little bit of work to get that to drop back down into place where it should be. And once it's in, then you see it links back up to my steering box. There also seems to be an awful lot of free play on this. So that could be related to that as well. There appears to be a dowel pin down inside the power steering box where the shaft connects, and I'm wondering if that dowel pin came out or if it sheared off or something along that nature. I haven't taken that part apart yet, so that's one of the things I'm gonna have to take that apart and see what happened in there and probably replace that dowel pin. Here's the diagram from the book showing the steering column, and here's where the steering wheel attaches. That's a good shape, but if you pull this cover off, there's a dowel pin down here, and I think this is where my problem is, because this upper shaft comes loose from the steering box. So the number 3 dowel pin is probably going to be my problem. So I just need to pull this cover off. Also ran into an issue where this was something I had noticed prior, and it's still an issue. There is an oil leak right here on the bevel gear case for the left front wheel tire. And it's leaking out there at the joint where this rotates. And looking at the parts book, in the service manual for the front axle, these pictures are really fuzzy and hard to make out. But it looks like they show that the whole front portal and gearbox assembly comes off. I'm not sure if it's necessary to pull it apart that far. I'm hoping not. Sometimes a lot of the previous stuff where I'm following on this tractor, it seems like you can skip a few steps and just start on the part you need to work on, but then you run into too many things being in the way. I don't think that should be the case for here, but there's been several times where I didn't think that'd be the case, and then I ended up having to go back and tearing things down further than I really wanted to. But they show in here at least 3 different things that can be shimmed in that assembly. And it's kind of hard to make out what's what in these pictures, but I think that the shim right here has to do with that gap between the top and the bottom. They're calling that the clearance between the knuckle arm and knuckle arm support. So I think that this is the adjustment that I need to make, and they have different shims that control that gap. There are several other bushings and clearances and shims too that I may have to go through at the same time, but hopefully that won't be too involved. After working with the subsoiler a little bit, it didn't really feel like I was loading the tractor too much anymore, so we actually decided to take the tractor down and hook it with a tow strap to the front of my truck, and parked the truck in a spot where I didn't care about rutting up the soil, and just let the tractor pull against that pull strap. It wasn't able to pull the whole truck. It's considerably heavier than this tractor is, but it did let me really work the engine and put a load on it and just let it spin the tires. I did this for a little bit, and it seemed like the engine immediately started getting a little stronger after doing this. I decided to stop using this method because I didn't want to overwork my transmission and put undue strain on the hydro or any of that kind of stuff, but it did seem to really make a difference. Now I can go up the hill in medium gear no problem. It also is starting up much faster than it used to. So I think what I'm going to do to continue the break-in process from here is get a few of these little issues fixed, and then I'm going to borrow the neighbor's bush hog, and I'm going to start bush hogging various parts of the property, and hopefully that bush hog will put enough load on the rest of the or be enough load to finish breaking in those rings the rest of the way. Here is how it's starting. Care of. The next thing's going to be is to finish painting the loader and getting it ready to go back onto the unit, and the same thing with the hood and cowl assembly. I've already started to paint that, but it needs some more paint work on that as well. Then we got the fresh decals to put out and everything, and hopefully by then we'll have a fully restored Kubota B20.